Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Please join us today in the study of Srimad Bhagavatam. Today we will be studying Srimad Bhagavatam, 11th Canto, Chapter 11, the symptoms of conditioned and liberated living entities. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridhari, Gopi Jana Vallabha Radha
Madhava Kunj Bihari Radha Madhava Kunj Bihari Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada Jaya Gurudeva 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 Nitai Gaur Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitai Gaur Hari Bol Nitai Gaur Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitai Gaur Hari Bol Nitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol Grantraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki Jai Srila Prabhupada ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki Jai Hare Krishna. Please join us for Mangalacharan prayers. We'll say it together. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiriyet Shravam Swakatha Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtanaha Hridayantasto Hirbhadrani Vidunote Suhasatam Nashtaprayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavate Uttam Shloke Bhaktir Bhakti Nashtiki. Hare Krishna. Please join us in the recitation of the first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam 11th Canto, Chapter 11. Title of the chapter is The Symptoms of Conditioned and Liberated Living Entities. Hare Krishna.
Are we reading Sanskrit first?
Okay,
Only the words?
that's fine. Shri Bhagwan Uvacha
Shri Bhagwan Uvacha
Baddho Mukta iti Vyakhya
Baddho Mukta iti Vyakhya
Gunato Mena Vastutaha
Gunato Mena Vastuta
Gunasya Mayam Mulatvan
Gunasya Maya Mulatvan
Name Moksha Na Bandhanam.
Name Moksho Na Bandhanam.
Please.
श्रीभगवानुवाच
श्रीभगवानुवाच
बद्धो मुक्त इति व्याख्या
बद्धो मुक्तो इति व्याख्या
गुणतो मे न वस्तुतः
गुणतो मे न वस्तुतः
गुणस्य माया मूलत्वान्
गुणस्य माया मूलत्वान्
न मे मोक्षो न बन्धनम्
न मे मोक्षो न बन्धनम्. Translation by the disciples of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, My dear Uddhav, due to the influence of the material modes of nature, which are under my control, the living entity is sometimes designated as conditioned and sometimes as liberated. In fact, however, the soul is never really bound up or liberated, and since I am the Supreme Lord of Maya, which is the cause of the modes of nature, I also am never to be considered liberated or in bondage. Hare Krishna. Please join us for Guru Prati. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Mukham Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langhayate Girim Yat Kripa Tadaham Vande Shri Gurum Dinataranam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So Uddhav, near the end of the chapter 10 of 11th Canto, asked these questions that how someone who is bound by the material modes ever be liberated? How can he ever be liberated? And on the other hand, one who is transcendental to the three modes of material nature. So, a living entity who is transcendental to the three modes of material nature, how could this living entity be bound? And then in the last verse he is asking that, my dear Lord, you are an expert, so only you can help me understand this concept of Nitya Siddha and Nitya Bhakta. Nitya means eternal, right? Siddha means who is liberated, eternally liberated. And then Nitya Buddha is who is eternally bound. So here, when Lord Krishna reveals, he actually not just reveals the symptoms, but he is also revealing how to take to devotional service and why we should offer our heart at the lotus feet of Shri Radha Krishna, because it is for our own benefit, and the process is also very nicely discussed. And to be able to understand the lessons in this particular chapter, I would like to first start with a story. So this is a story of a young lady. She was, newly married, and she went to her in-laws' place right after marriage. What happened was she was very liberal-minded, as we see, young generation today is very liberal-minded. However, the mother-in-law was very narrow-minded. She was very conservative. Wear your clothes properly, you have to wear this kind of clothes, you have to cook meal in this particular manner, you have to behave in this particular manner. If outsiders come, you have to be inside the house. So now there is a conflict, right? So the newly wedded daughter-in-law, the new daughter-in-law is, feeling very disturbed, being restricted in her ways, because she is finding it very unnatural, right? A liberal person gets used to a specific lifestyle, and a conservative person is used to another lifestyle. And now there's this big conflict. So again, before we go further in the story, I want to make sure that everyone understand that these chapters from chapter 6 to 29 are part of Uddhav Gita. So we are covering Uddhav Gita. And Uddhav is a pure devotee of Lord Krishna. So where Bhagavad Gita ends, Uddhav Gita starts. And here, we are talking about a story where a newly married lady, who's very liberal-minded, she goes to her in-laws' place and the mother-in-law is very conservative. And so there is, what happens after a few days, somehow she was tolerating, this young lady. But afterwards she started, responding back that, why do you do this? And so there was a quarrel. Every day there was quarrel happening. Always this daughter-in-law and mother-in-law, they were at each other, because they always considered their perspective to be the right perspective. And it became so much that one day when, the girl felt that she is right? And her mother-in-law said something very harsh. And at that time she became so angry. And further, her anger was even topped by her husband supporting his mother. Now that is too much, right? First you are right, and on top of that, the person who's supposed to be supporting is suddenly taking the other person's side. So she was feeling that my husband is on her side while I'm the one who's right. So she just storms out of the house. And she goes to her father's place. And she tells her father everything that has happened. Her father was a doctor. So he listened patiently. He said, okay, you are welcome to stay here. And when you feel right, you can go back home. And she said, no, I'm not going back home. And she was in so much anger that she said, I want you to give me some kind of poison so that I can give that poison to my mother-in-law and kill her. My father was very quiet. He said, you are just upset right now. Just calm down. We'll talk tomorrow. Just go to sleep, It's late at night. So somehow he consoled her. She went to sleep, but all night she could not sleep. She was feeling tormented. She was reminded of all these incidents with this bickering on her. Her mother-in-law was telling her to do this, to do that, and all those things were going on. And she lost her sleep all night. Next morning, when she again went to her father, he could see that she didn't sleep. She was either upset, angry, crying, thinking what to do. She feels lost in this life. She just got married and she got such in-laws. And especially her mother-in-law, she cannot bear to see her mother-in-law. And she says again the same thing. What did she say? That I want you to give me a poison that I can give it to her. And then I want to kill her. Now her father, he says, but what will be the benefit? See, if I give you poison and you feed it to her, she dies, and you and I both will go to jail. That is not a good idea. And of course, there's an oath all doctors take. So he says, I have taken this oath. How can I do this? Yet at the same time, every day, morning, afternoon, evening, she was constantly pressing her father to somehow agree to give her poison so she can give it to her mother-in-law. And sometimes parents, they feel so much compassion and so much attachment to their children that they sometimes give in. So her father finally gives in. He says, okay, now you have to follow how I tell you so that we don't get punished for this. She says, okay, what is it? I just want to kill her. He says, now he gives her a big bottle. He says, this is the poison. But you should not give it immediately that she dies immediately. Even if you are at anger, you have to promise me that you will not do that. You have to give a pinch of it every day. So that way she will die slowly over a few months. And now that since everybody knows that you and her are always fighting with each other, you have to be very kind to her. You have to smile. You have to obey her orders. Show that. So when she will die after a few months, everyone will think that she has just experienced death in a natural path. Looks like a great plan. Her father is still very much distressed. He's like, I don't know, but do you think you can do this? Because otherwise both of our lives will be at stake. So now the daughter, she says, yes, I promise you that I will follow your instructions. There will no harm that will come to you because, my mother only has you as her support. And I will also want to make sure that I don't feel any harm. So I will be very patient. I will be very tolerant. I will be very humble. And I will just go along and make her happy. And, so that nobody suspects anything. So now this big conspiracy is at play. She returns back home. And she, first thing she does is as she enters the house, she goes and touches the feet of her mother-in-law and asks for forgiveness. Her mother-in-law is like, okay, so let's see how long this will last, because this girl is very liberal. I know that, mother-in-law is thinking. And the girl is thinking, how am I going to sustain myself in this environment when my mother-in-law is so conservative? I cannot live, I can't breathe in this environment. What to do? Yet somehow she controls herself. And every day, when she was cooking the meal, when she was taking it for her father-in-law, she was giving her normal, but when she was giving it to her mother-in-law, she would put a pinch of that poison her father gave and mix it in either water or sometimes in the sabji, the vegetables and so forth. So she was feeding. Now what happened was, she was being very nice to her mother-in-law. She would obey her mother-in-law. So everyone was like, surprised by her behavior. Mother-in-law was very suspecting something is fishy here, right? But her husband became favorable, her father-in-law became favorable, and in due course of time, since she was always singing glories of her mother-in-law, telling her, tell me about your childhood, tell me when you were newly wedded and newly married, what did you guys do, tell us. And she was serving constantly while inquiring very submissively. So now mother-in-law, her heart starts changing. And so anybody would come, she would glorify her daughter-in-law. And she would start behaving very affectionately towards her daughter-in-law. So now daughter-in-law is thinking, this scheme is working, this is great. Now mother-in-law became so affectionate over a month or two that the daughter-in-law was feeling guilty. She's like, she has become more affectionate to me than my own mother, right? And I'm trying to kill her. And how's it, will I be able to bear now that we have become so close to each other, we are loving each other, and now she's going to die because of the effect of that poison. I have to find a solution. So she rushes back. She finds an excuse to go back to her father's house. She rushes back and says, Father, please give me an antidote. Give me an antidote of the poison that you give, because she loves me too much, I love her too much, I can't see her die, and especially by my hands. Father says, what poison? All I gave you was a sweetener. So this is Daksha, right? This is an expert. And here we see from this story as how this father, who was also a medical practitioner, a doctor, used a strategy to turn around her daughter, and he, from the picture, he did what he said. He removed that mother-in-law from the picture, who was very hateful, who was always fighting, and he also removed that negativity from her daughter. And he brought both of them in harmony, so that they could live peacefully in harmony, happily together. Could you please turn that on? So here it is, so this is called Daksha. An expert person knows how to bend the stick without snapping it. And we see from Srila Prabhupada's life, from the very beginning, he had been an expert. How? You would ask? So again, in His Holiness Mukund Maharaj's book, he is writing that Srila Prabhupada, when they met, they were curious to learn Sanskrit, right? Sanskrit is the ancient language. So Srila Prabhupada agreed, yes, I'll teach you Sanskrit, come today in the evening at 7 p.m. and I'll teach you Sanskrit. And when they went, Srila Prabhupada picked up the chalk and wrote, Ishvaraha Paramaha Krishnaha Satchidananda Vigraha Anadir Adir Govindaha Sarva Karana Karanam. Ishvara Parama Krishna. Lord Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Satchidananda Vigraha. He has a body of eternity, knowledge and bliss. And Anadir Adir Govinda. Anadir Adir Govinda. So no one is older than him, and he is the oldest Adi. Govinda, he gives pleasure to our senses. Sarva Karana Karanam. He is the cause of all causes. So he, while teaching them Sanskrit, was giving them the most confidential knowledge that Lord Krishna is the cause of everything. He is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And if you take His shelter, then you will be full of eternity, knowledge and bliss, which is actually our nature as living entities. But Srila Prabhupada was in such a simple way passing on this information. Many times, Srila Prabhupada would be, interacting with people who wanted to take to Krishna consciousness, or were just even inquisitive, curious to know what this Krishna consciousness is all about. Who are these Hare Krishnas? What are they doing? And Srila Prabhupada said, do you know who's God? And sometimes they would be dumbfounded. So he would call one of the children and he said, so who's God? So the children would very easily say, Lord Krishna, He is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He said, see, even children in Krishna consciousness know who God is. How could you not know? So he made this confidential knowledge, which is supposed to be hidden in all the scriptures, easily accessible. I remember when I was a child and my grandpa, my Nana, he used to ask me to read Bhagavad Gita. And I would read Bhagavad Gita, the whole Sanskrit verses. And I was a very small kid, and so I was like 7, 8 years old at the time during the summer vacation. And I was reading this Sanskrit because I was good in reading Hindi language. So again, I could read Devanagari Lipi very well at that time. And so I was reading it and he was enjoying it. And I was doing it because I would get reward at the end. But the true reward came is because of that mercy, I was able to understand many aspects of Bhagavad Gita. And when I read Bhagavad Gita as it is by Srila Prabhupada, it actually revealed the true meaning behind all those verses. As a child, I was just reading to get that reward. So here there is another personality in my life. I experienced my Nana, who was an expert by giving me, using a child's nature that children would like to eat chocolate and candy and ice cream. He would give me 1 rupee. He would promise to give me 1 rupee if I read that small book from start to end. It was all in Sanskrit. And I would do that, sitting in front of his deities, and he would sit right beside me and encouraging me, actually correcting me many times. And I was so surprised that he actually knew whole of Bhagavad Gita, but he would ask me to do it. But at the same time, I was just attached to that 1 rupee. But by his mercy, by the mercy of such an expert devotees, we get the benefit. And from this example where we see how this dad, who was a doctor, took care of the situation so nicely that situation brought perfect harmony. And this is exactly what happens when we surrender at the lotus feet of Lord Shri Krishna. We come in harmony with ourselves, we come in harmony with the material nature, and we come in harmony with the whole spiritual material universes. Everything comes in harmony. And then we are not affected by the dualities. Now Lord Krishna, as he is describing to Uddhav, that as somebody who dreams, in their mind they are making up different kind of images. They take on a specific kind of body when they are dreaming. There are various kind of sense objects they are interacting with. And with their intelligence they are, interacting with these sense objects, and a whole series of events are unfolding. But when somebody wakes up, they realize that it was unreal. So even though Maya is, temporary in nature because it changes its form, yet at the same time it is there. It's an extension of Lord Krishna's potency. So, Devi he isha gunamayi mama maya duratya. Lord Krishna says that this material energy of mine, so he is the Lord of the material energy. So similarly, if we think this material energy to be separated from Lord Krishna, then we are dreaming state. We are in forgetfulness. And this forgetfulness causes ignorance on us. Lord Krishna reveals, and this is a verse that Srila Prabhupada spoke many, many times. It's from Bhagavad Gita. Sarvasya chaham hridisannivishto matta smitir jnanam apohanam cha vedescha sarverahameva vedyo vedanta kridveda vidayeva chaham. Sarvasya chaham hridisannivishto. I am residing in the heart of all living entities, Lord Krishna is saying. Mattaha jnanam smritir apohanam cha. So again, from me comes, he's saying, knowledge, jnanam, smriti, jnanam, apohanam cha. Smriti is remembrance, jnanam is knowledge, and apohanam, forgetfulness. So it's very interesting that because of the mercy of Lord, we remember. And because of His mercy, we get knowledge. And because of His mercy, we get forgetfulness also, which causes the darkness of ignorance. So in this darkness of ignorance, it's that night time, right? When we are sleeping, in this darkness of ignorance, when a living entity is sleeping, thinking, associating with the body and conditioned body, thinking that I am this body, and forgetting its true identity. So that's a dreaming state, because now we are thinking something that we are not. We are thinking we are this body. That's avidya, that's ignorance, and that causes darkness in our life. And we are not able to see the various sense objects and the material energy, the three modes of material nature, in relationship with Krishna. And we are thinking it's separate, and we want to enjoy, and that is avidya. So Lord Krishna says that in reality, the material energy does not bound the living entity. It is the living entity who is falling in this ignorance, in this well of ignorance, the darkness, the dark well, andhakupa. And so is forgetting its true identity. Right? So what are we doing? It's like we are holding on to a tree and saying, leave me, leave me, leave me. Well, Maya is jad. It is inactive in nature. The only active living being in this material world are the living entities, we, the jivas. And then the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So in reality, all we have to do is leave the tree and we'll be freed, from holding the tree. So that is our ignorance. That is our stupidity. Yet at the same time, we get affected by the various factors. So Lord Krishna here talks about the two birds in the tree. So now he is taking us back to chapter 15, where he talked to Arjun. He gave the instructions that just like there is a tree, a banyan tree, upside down, right? The roots going up, the branches going down. And so the twigs of this tree are the Vedic hymns. The fruits are happiness and distress. There are birds on this tree. So the root, which is at the top, right? And this is basically, where do you see this kind of tree? It's a reflection of a tree which is on a bank of a river. So a true tree will have its branches going up, the roots going down. But this tree and its reflection would appear just upside down with the roots here and then the branches going down. And then the upper branches are the heavenly planets, lower branches are the hellish planets. There are two birds. One bird is going from branch to branch and tasting different kind of fruits. And these fruits are happiness and distress. And at the root, at the top of this tree is Brahma, the first living entity. And then all other branches like the Vedic hymns. And then this tree is nourished by the three modes of material nature. And one bird is tasting this tree because we by nature, anand bhaya abhyasat, we are always seeking happiness, right? We all want to be happy. And at the same time, we have to understand how to be happy. We are looking for happiness, but sometimes we are bewildered in ignorance. It's like, you are trying to find something in a dark room. You don't know where it is. Without realizing that all we have to do is call out to Lord Shri Krishna and then there will be light everywhere. Tesham aham tesham evanukampatham aham ajnana jamtama nasham atma bhavasto jnana deepena bhasvata. Tesham evanukampatham. So Lord Krishna says to my devotees, I have this anukampa, right? This causeless mercy. Aham ajnana jamtamaha. So, nashyami atma bhavasto. So he removes the darkness in our heart with the lamp of knowledge. Jnana deepena bhasvata. So just like sun arises, after a dark night, and everywhere it's lighted and we can see things properly. Similarly, Lord, He removes the darkness of ignorance from our heart so that we can see who we are. We are living entities, we are Jiva. And Jivera Surupaya Krishna Nityadas. So the second stage is, first we know what we are, so we are living entities. Second we know is what is our nature, what is our dharma. That is the eternal religion, Sanatana Dharma, as eternal servant of Lord Shri Krishna. When we are situated in this manner, then we know how to perform our activities. So Lord Krishna is describing that one who is in forgetfulness, the solution is knowledge. Yet at the same time, that knowledge should be exercised. If you have the knowledge, but you just keep it. So for example, if you get a recipe of a great, very nice palatable dish that maybe you got this recipe from a friend of yours. You went there for, a kirtan program, and you really like one of the vegetables, and you said, okay, give me, or maybe one of the dessert, and you said, please give me the recipe, and your friend writes down the recipe and gives it to you. And you take it back home and you look at this recipe. Every time you look at it, you're reminded of the taste, but you're not really tasting it. You're only reminded of it, right? So that recipe on its own would not help. So it is very important to get the knowledge, that is like getting the recipe, but then to carry it out, have, practice it so that you can realize it. And from the previous 3 chapters, we also heard 7, 8, 9, where Lord Dattatreya as Avadhut Brahman reveals the 24 gurus, and later on from his own life, which is the 25th element, he talks about as how we can learn from observation, using our intelligence correctly, what is the nature of this material world and how we can be happy in harmony with everything. Hare Krishna. So there are some interesting aspects from that perspective Lord Krishna is revealing to Uddhav. Now we also have to make a distinction between Bhagavad Gita and Uddhav Gita. Arjuna sometimes, as we saw before battle of Kurukshetra, when he, promised that Brahman to save his son, right? The 10 sons of Brahman were taken away by Mahavishnu. So the 10th one was about to be born and Arjuna promised him. So when he went to protect, his wife was about to give birth to a child, Arjuna actually worshipped Lord Shiva. So Arjuna sometimes would worship demigods, not Lord Krishna, because he was thinking, 9 sons of this Brahman were taken away, Lord Krishna could not do it. If I worship Lord Shri Krishna, means what benefit would I have? Rather, I have received this divine weapons from, Lord Shiva, so let me worship Lord Shiva and then go. So by chanting his mantras and worshipping him, asking for his blessing, then Arjuna left to protect. So sometimes Arjuna would do this. And Lord Krishna later on in Bhagavad Gita, when he is speaking Bhagavad Gita, he says that demigod worshippers are worshipping me, but indirectly. It's, indirect worship. Avidipurvakam. So again, it is an indirect way they are worshipping, and their results are temporary in nature. So Arjuna was bewildered. Why? Because at the battle of Kurukshetra, when he did the surveillance of the 2 armies, right? When he asked Lord Krishna to take his chariot in the center, and he was surveying the 2 armies, and he saw that all his friends, his teachers, his relatives, they've all gathered on this battlefield to die. So there was a conflict that arose in Arjuna. His conflict arose because from his bodily concept, he realized that he has various upadhis, right? Various titles he holds. He is a Kshatriya. Kshatriya, as per duty, is somebody challenges you have to fight. But then on the other side, he sees his grandsire, Pitamaha, Bhishma. How will he fight with Pitamaha Bhishma? How will he respond with arrows if Pitamaha Bhishma is against him? Because he loves him so much. Then he sees his, instructing spiritual master, his Dronacharya is there. And all skill he had is because of the mercy of Dronacharya. How will he fight with Dronacharya? Then he's seeing all his friends, his relatives, his uncles, his in-laws, and he's wondering how will he fight? Everyone is gathered on this battlefield and they are ready to die, and there is going to be so much agony, because if somebody who's very close to you dies, it hurts you very much. No matter how much you try to be detached, but still it hurts you because of this bewilderment. His different titles were in conflict with each other. So when the things are in conflict with each other, there is, of course, anxiety there, and there is lamentation that this would happen, and you aspire that it should not happen, you make an effort, it should not happen. And that's why his senses were burning, his skin was burning, his bow, Gandhi, was slipping from his hand, and he was saying that because of the weakness of my heart, I am not able to make proper. This is Arjun on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, that he is not able to stay equipoised, he is not able to compose himself, and that he is not able to fight. So, because of all that attachment he had with the different personalities present on the battlefield. And at that time, Lord Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita to align his prescribed duty as a Kshatriya and his prescribed duty even with all those upadhis, his Swadharma, right? Those are the prescribed duties. And he aligned it with his Sanatan Dharma as his eternal religion. And what is that? Jivera Sarupoya Krishnera Nityadas. And then the last instruction, the most important instruction Lord Krishna gave is Sarvadhammam Prityaja Mamekam Sharanam Vraja Aham Tvam Sarva Papebhyo Mokshishashmi Mashacha. Surrender all varieties of religion. Means give up all varieties of religions, surrender unto me. I will deliver you of all your past reactions. Do not fear. So he had this fear, this anxiety. So that will not be there if he does this. And of course, having heard from Lord Shri Krishna the purpose of life and what he is supposed to do as a Kshatriya, he was re-established in his position. That he has to remember Lord Shri Krishna and carry out his duty, even engage his anger in carrying out his duty. So there is a very important aspect that we have to create a balance, right? We have to create a balance with our surrounding. We have to be in harmony with our surrounding. And this harmony will allow the energy of the Lord to flow through us smoothly. And this energy is all positive. It is benefiting to all humanity. It is spreading happiness to everyone. Every interaction we have is of loving exchange. Every interaction we have is filled with gratitude. Every interaction shows the humility in our heart. And we can learn a lot from the way we judge others, the way we think of different circumstances. And yes, in good condition, everybody can behave nicely. But when someone is in anxiety, when someone is facing fear, when someone is being threatened for their life, then how one behaves determines their attitude. And this is where Lord Krishna reveals that a pure devotee is equipoised, he is sama. In all these circumstances, understanding that these are just temporary happenings in this material world. And he is always very expertly able to see how can I serve Lord Krishna. That is the only focus. To reestablish that link, that is yoga. To reestablish that connection, that relationship we have with our Supreme Father, our affectionate Father, who by his causeless mercy has granted us this human form of life. We are not qualified to get this human form of life. Yet, by the mercy of Lord Krishna, who is seeing us as living entities wandering in this world, Brahma Brahmite Kaun Bhagyavana Jiva, Guru Krishna Prasade Paya Bhakti Lata Vicha. And on top of that, we are wandering in this material world to higher planets, to lower planets, but by the mercy of Lord, we become fortunate enough to receive Swachatya Guru, Lord Krishna in our heart as Paramatma. He gives us the shelter of a spiritual master, a bona fide spiritual master who appears in a disciplic succession, who knows the science of Krishna consciousness, who knows the science of devotional service, who is there to enlighten us. And Lord Krishna appears in the form of this spiritual master, and we can take shelter of this spiritual master, serving this spiritual master, humbly asking him about the spiritual life, how we can progress, engaging in devotional service. We can experience eternal bliss just by offering our heart at the lotus feet of Shri Shri Radha Krishna. Such a simple is the process. Now, as Lord Krishna is identifying this mood of a living entity who is liberated. Yet at the same time, the very first verse he is saying that in reality a living entity is never bound, because material universe, the three modes of material nature, they are making us behave because of the false ego, right? The false ego is because thinking that I am this body. It's born of ignorance, right? There is the darkness. Then comes intelligence, which is in the mode of passion. So thinking in darkness, thinking that this material universe is a place to enjoy, we want to interact with those sense objects, and our senses are luring us away. So they are driving us in a direction where we are thinking that these sense objects are separate from Krishna, which is because of the darkness. We cannot see that connection, that these are just expanded energies of Lord Krishna. His multifarious potencies, they are expanding and they are increasing all the time. And so this material energy is also one of his energy. And Lord Krishna says, Apreyam itasta anyam prakatim vidhima param jiva bhuta mahabaho yayedam dharyate jagat. Besides this inferior nature, O mighty armed Arjun, there is a superior energy of mind consisting of all living entities who are struggling with material nature and are sustaining the universe. So here, Lord Krishna is revealing that the living entity, we are actually superior energy. We are active. Material nature on its own is inactive. It is because of our presence that this body has consciousness and that it can move and it can interact. So that is where we have to understand that we have to use our senses to give the pleasure to the master of the senses. Lord is Rishikesha, right? Master of the senses. So only then our senses would be satisfied. Just like Lakshmi ji, she is chanchala by nature. She doesn't stay at any place. Yet at the same time, she loves to serve Lord Krishna. She's always pressing his feet in the Vishnu form when he expired as, many of the Vishnus. So again, which is where we understand. So it is for our benefit. And so now that our intelligence is engaged and is using away this important, this invaluable life, human form of life, so we, instead of engaging our mind in this sense gratification, we have to pull our mind back and detach it from the senses, from the sense objects, and engage it in the service of Lord Shri Krishna. Bhajahu re mana Shri Nanda Nandana Bhaya Charanara Vindare Dulabha Manava Janam Satsange Tarahu re Bhava Sindhure. So we have to engage our mind in the service of Lord Shri Krishna. Because just by serving Lord Shri Krishna, we can cross over this material ocean in the perfect boat in the form of our human body. So this body is like taking out a thorn with a thorn. So similarly, we can use this body that we have received from material energy by the mercy of Lord Shri Krishna, his causeless mercy, in serving him, and we can easily cross over. Now there are some warnings Lord Krishna gives in this particular chapter, that because of forgetfulness, somebody can engage. So I give the example where you have a recipe, but you have to really use that recipe to make that dish so that you can realize the taste, not just imagine it. Sometimes we are running after mirages. Why? Because our mind is bringing up these different images from our past lives and many times, and maybe from our past experiences of wonderful things that we've got attached to. So and these are temporary things, which are actually the cause of our lamentation, because we are in anxiety, sometimes lamenting about the past or aspiring for the future. So in this way, we are constantly in anxiety. So if we want to get out of this anxiety, we have to directly use it by getting the knowledge and then practicing that knowledge, understanding the principles, realizing the values, right, that comes by engaging in devotional service, so that through this process, the devotional service, the various process of devotional service, we can establish ourselves and follow a life of principles and establish those values, the qualities that are essential for us for our own purification. So Lord Krishna is telling that, O my dear Uddhav, a man is most miserable when, what are the circumstances? When he has to take care of cow that is barren and does not give milk. So in case of a cow, normally when a cow has a calf, a young calf, because of the affection, she produces milk. But if she is barren, she has no attachment, no affection, so it's very difficult for her to give milk. And if a man is engaged in serving such a cow, to maintain such a cow, he is hoping that maybe one day this cow will, start giving milk. But after some time, the man gets really frustrated that so much expense is coming and I'm not getting any return, right? Return on investment is like a big deal. That's the capitalist mindset. So this also reminds us, when I was in second grade, we heard about this story. This man, he was looking at his hen who used to lay one golden egg every day. So actually I read a much extensive version when I, grew much older. So he was always thinking that if I cut this hen, then I'll get all the eggs at the same time. So this is the story we read in the early age. But afterward when I read, actually this man, the extension of what this was, this man was thinking that I have to feed this hen every day, right? And all the eggs are in her stomach anyway. So I don't want to feed the front half. I only want to use the later half from where the egg comes out. I don't want to take care of the front half. So he cuts off the front half so he doesn't have to feed the egg. But then there is nothing that's coming out next day because the hen is dead. So it's not giving any golden egg anymore. So that is the mindset of a person who becomes very miserable because he has to feed even something that is giving results, right? Even there, somebody becomes anxious. Forget about when there is no result and it's like a black hole. You're only dumping things in and no return. So similarly, a man who is feeding a cow that does not give milk becomes miserable over time. And so he may act in anxiety. Or a man who has an unchaste wife, he is very miserable. Why? Because this man who has an unchaste wife, he is thinking that maybe I will give her to so many nice examples of so many exalted personalities in these revealed scriptures, like Queen Kunti, Devahuti, and so many other great personalities. Suniti, the mother of Dhruv Maharaj, and so many other personalities, Aditi, and so forth, the wife of Kashyapa Muni, mother of Indra and Upendra, Lord Vamandev. So maybe one day she will be chaste, she will become chaste, hearing all this. But sometimes it doesn't happen. So the man is very miserable, he is constantly feeling that, the anxiety and all the, he's feeling the misery that's coming his way. Yet then on top of that, if he has children who are as ignorant as her, completely blind to the spiritual life, then he becomes more and more miserable. So Lord Krishna is revealing that a person like this should also be, he's very miserable and is constantly in anxiety. Or a person who has a body which is fully dependent on others. Now when somebody is fully dependent on others, one does not feel, unless one is lazy by nature, that this is the right thing to do. And especially when he sees that others are, treating him like a beggar or even being sympathetic. So this is an example where Dhritarashtra was, enlightened by his younger brother Vidur. After the battle of Kurukshetra, Yudhishthira Maharaj and the Pandavas, of course, all the Pandavas and Queen Kunti, they came and they were in the palace, right? He was the king now, Yudhishthira Maharaj. So Dhritarashtra was no more the king. Yet at the same time, he was staying at the palace with his wife Gandhari, And Yudhishthira Maharaj was taking care every day in the morning. The first thing he would do is he would go to the Gandhari's, place, and he would pay obeisances. I mean, he would ask for blessings. And Dhritarashtra was feeling that such a righteous person is. He was also called Dhamraj. Of course, he happened to be also son of Dhamraj, and at the same time he was also known as Ajatshatra and many other names. So Yudhishthira Maharaj was behaving like this, but Vidur revealed to him that actually he is just being sympathetic towards you. In reality, you were the cause of all the miseries that they had to face, all these Pandavas. They had to have this. They were driven out of the kingdom. All their property and kingdom that was usurped by Duryodhan, by cheating at this gambling match with the help of Shakuni. And so many schemes were made to kill them. And you are being fed like a dog is being fed by someone out of sympathy. So here, that is so miserable. So Dhritarashtra became so miserable by hearing these harsh words, which were truth, right, from Vidur, that he decided to leave the palace, and having received the spiritual knowledge from younger brother Vidur, he, Gandhari, along with Kunti, they went in the forest, and there he became a yogi because of the spiritual knowledge that his brother had imparted onto him. And by the yogic power, he was able to meditate on the Supreme Personality of Godhead and burn his body, and Gandhari entered the hut at the same time, and she also got burned. So this is how they were able to go back home, back to Godhead. So a person like that, who is living completely dependent on others, is also miserable. Or a person who has useless children, who are, very bad in behavior, they are not devotees, and they are, engaged in all kind of sense gratification, and creating all kind of inconveniences, not just for parents, but for all other, friends and family and the neighbors. So they also cause miserable condition for the parents. And also wealth that is not utilized. So if not utilized rightly, that is important. And the wealth, when not utilized rightly, is the wealth that is utilized for sense gratification. So everything that we have, we can use it in Lord Krishna's service. If we have a nice house, we can have Lord Krishna's deities in our house. If we have facilities, then we can nicely cook, bhoga for the deities, offer every day. We take care of our deities by changing their dress, by worshipping them, and so forth. So Lord Krishna is revealing all these factors, and he's saying, Prakriti kriyamanani gune karmani sarvasha ahankara vimuddhatma karta hamiti manyate. Yet at the same time, a person gets bewildered. So this is where, even though living entity is never bound, and so how can the question of liberation would come? Or similarly, for Lord Krishna, who is above the three modes of material nature, how can a question of liberation would come? Yet at the same time, this prakriti, this material nature of Lord Shri Krishna, kriyamana, gune karmani sarvasha. So there are three modes of material nature. So constantly acting under the influence of these three modes of material nature. And these three modes of material nature is because we are thinking we are this body, because of the false ego. And that false ego is under the born of the mode of ignorance. We are constantly engaging various kind of activities. And those activities are fruitive activities because we are attached to the fruits. And last lesson we learned, karmane vadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. We have the right to perform our duties, but we are not entitled to the fruits of our labor. Because that's where the misery lies, when we try to break that injunction, that regulation from the Shastras. So, ahankara vimuddhatma, thinking I am the doer, kartahamiti manyate. So, being in the influence of false ego and engaging in all kind of fruitive activities, thinking that I am the cause of all these activities. So there is, when Lord Krishna is revealing that in such a state a person becomes miserable, Uddhava wants to know that what is also the case where one is liberated. And Lord reveals that I am in the heart of all living entities. And when one worships me with the proper attitude, so he even tells that how to worship. And at the same time, who to worship is also very important. And this is where a reference in the purport from Brahma Samhita is given. Ramadimurtishu kala niyamena tishtan nanavataram akarod bhuvaneshu kintu Krsna swayam samabhavat paramah pubanyo Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who manifested himself personally as Krishna, and the different avatars in the world in the forms of Ram, Narasimha, Vaman, etc. as his subjective portions. So Lord Krishna is the original Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then, when one is such established, there is also a reference given where Lord Krishna is saying that one who is in knowledge then doesn't have any activity to do. Now that, when he gives, is a little bewildering because we learn that devotional service is active engagement, Srila Prabhupada always said. So in the purport it is revealed very nicely by his disciple, Srila Prabhupada's disciple, where they are revealing that this is with reference to the Jnana Yogis, that they understand that all these activities are being performed by the senses which are part of the material nature. So, and Jnani, a Jnana Yogi does not engage in such activities. And that is also not right. That's like, you found, some wealth on the road and you're saying, okay, I don't have to do anything. That is not that. There are three ways you can behave. If you're walking and on the road you find some wealth, then you can either keep it in your pocket, which is, finders keepers, a mode of a materialist person, thinking it to be separate from Lord Shri Krishna, the owner of the wealth. Or you could say, I have nothing to do. This is the mood of a Jnani. He is Brahmanvadi, he is Mayavadi, he is saying, I'm not going to get in this karma. And even that action is a karma. And actually it's a vikarma because you did not use it properly. And then the third is, you can take that wealth and find out who is the owner of that wealth and give that wealth to that person. And of course everything is coming from Lord Shri Krishna. Bhoktaram yagyatapasam sarva loka maheshwaram surhidam sarva bhutanam gyatva shantim richati. Bhoktaram yagyatapasam. Lord Krishna is saying that he is the benefactor of all the sacrifices. All sacrifices are to be done to satisfy him. And he is the supreme proprietor of material and spiritual universes. And he is our best friend and well-wisher and beneficiary. So again, he is always looking for our benefits. So when we know this, then we become peaceful. So when we hear about this Jnani, then how do Jnani come to devotional service would be the next question, right? Because Lord Krishna has been revealing, take to devotional service, all of a sudden he talks about Jnani. So in Bhagavad Gita he has revealed, Bahunam janmanam ante jnanvam mam prapadyante vasudeva sarvamiti samahatma sudurlabha. After many births, Bahunam janmanam ante jnanvam mam prapadyante. A Jnana Yogi, so that's where the reference is given, I'm paraphrasing. So Jnana Yogi, after many births, acquiring knowledge, finally realizes that Vasudeva Sarvamiti, that Lord Vasudeva, who is present everywhere and is omnipotent, omnipresent and omniscient, so I have to take shelter of his lotus feet. I have to surrender my heart at his lotus feet. I have to engage in devotional service. And such a soul is very rare. Sudurlabha. Durlabha is rare. Su is like very rare. So once a person or living entity takes shelter of Lord Shri Krishna, such a personality is very rare. And then he reveals in Bhagavad Gita that who would know him, right? So we started with who has to know him. So there are four kinds of people who surrender to Lord Shri Krishna. Artho jigyasu arthati jnanishcha bhattashva. Chaturvidha bhajante mam jana sukritino arjuna. Right? Artho jigyasu arthati jnanischa bhartarshabha. So Artho is one who is in distress. Jigyasu is one who is inquisitive, looking around, what is this all about? And then Arthati, one who is seeking wealth, seeking something, seeking opulence. And Jnani, the one who is seeking knowledge, who is frustrated from this world and wants to really know. He wants to be in light so that he can act properly. And of these four kind of people, Jnani is considered the most, he is the highest because he is coming and with this mood of inquiring, what is the purpose of this life? Why am I suffering here? Why is there so much misery here? Why is there lockdown, COVID-19 situation going on? When will this lockdown end? What will be the way we will be living moving forward? How can we go back to our original way of living? All these questions are arriving in our head. And so a Jnani would take shelter of Lord Shri Krishna, and just by taking shelter, he would become peaceful because all that anxiety is taken away. Sarvadhabam parityaja mam ekam sharanam vaja. Give up all varieties of religion and just surrender unto the lotus feet of Lord Shri Krishna, Shri Radha Krishna. By surrendering our heart and engaging in devotional service, we can attain perfection in this very life. And so, we can know him. Why? Because Lord Krishna reveals that we can know him. Bhaktya mam avijanati yavan yaschasmi tatvataha tato mam tatvato gyatva vishte tad anantaram. One can understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead as he is only by devotional service. And when one is in full consciousness of the Supreme Lord, so when one is in full Krishna consciousness, by such devotion, he can enter into the kingdom of God. He can go back home, back to Godhead. So Lord Krishna reveals this. And then what happens when such a person who is a devotee of Lord Krishna, Brahma bhuta prasannatma na shochati na kankshati sama sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim labhate param. So that person is at a Brahma bhuta stage. He is at a Brahman stage automatically. Even though in this body he has attained that stage. Right? Na shochati na kankshati. He does not lament on the past. He does not aspire for the future. So he is completely free of all kind of anxieties in this material world. And constantly engage in loving devotional service at the lotus feet of Lord Shri Krishna. Mad bhaktim labhate param. So he is constantly engaged in serving Lord Shri Krishna. Now there are also references given in this chapter from the qualities of a devotee and how one worships Lord Shri Krishna. So those references have also been given as how one worships Lord Shri Krishna, Shri Radha Krishna. Thank you. So there is a quick reference that we'll be covering as the last part of this chapter. There are 28 qualities of devotee that have been discussed. We'll have to have a separate class because it will almost take an hour just discussing those. But worship, first what to worship, Lord Krishna is saying that, oh my dear saintly Uddhav. So again, understand, Uddhav is a pure devotee. Please know that, you may worship me in the sun. So when we see Surya Narayan, every day we can worship him. That one can worship the fire, because Lord appears as Yajna Purusha, right, in the form of fire. One can worship Brahmanas, one can worship cows, one can worship Vaishnavas, one can worship sky, one can worship wind, one can even worship water, one can worship earth, one can worship individual soul, and also worship all living entities. Now that is amazing. Now the interesting thing is, it is later on Lord reveals how to worship. So that is even more interesting. That one can worship sun by chanting selected Vedic mantras and by performing worship and offering obeisances. That's how you worship sun. And it's very interesting that, in the old age Vedic times, people would go in the river, they would be waist deep in the river, and they would offer water to sun. Right? and they would chant various kind of mantras, like Om Grine Surya Devaya Namaha, Om Grine Bhaskaraya Namaha, Om Grine Adityaya Namaha, and so forth. So the mantras continue to go in worship of Lord, a sun god. We are at the same time understanding that sun is the eye of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When you have that connection, then it is right. When we worship Lord Shiva, understanding that he is the topmost Vaishnava, right? Vaishnava nam yatha Shambhu, right? Nindaga nam yatha Ganga. So Lord Shiva is the topmost Vaishnava of all the rivers. Ganges is the topmost. Devanam achyuto yatha. And of all the worshipable deities, Lord Krishna is the topmost, achyuto. And Puranam idam tathayana. Of all the scriptures, the topmost scripture is Srimad Bhagavatam. And so he reveals how to worship. So we understand that to worship sun, we have to chant the Vedic mantras, offer obeisances. To worship fire, we have to make oblations of ghee. And of course, we sing mantras which end in Swaha. Swaha is the wife of Yajna Purusha. So again, expression of Radharani. And who is Yajna Purusha? None other than Lord Shri Krishna. Bhuktaram Yajna Tapasam. So he is the benefactor of all sacrifices. And one worships Brahmanas by receiving them as guests. Right? And even when uninvited. So when the Brahmanas appear at the doorstep, we should receive them nicely. Lord Krishna shows in 10th Canto when Devashi Narad comes and when Sudama Brahman comes, how he worships them with proper paraphernalia, washing their feet first, giving them nice seats to sit on, and properly worshipping them with ghee, lamps and charmers and so forth, opulent worship. And one can also provide various for the cows by offering them grass and other suitable grains and paraphernalia for the pleasure and health of the cows. And one can worship Vaishnavas by offering loving friendship to the Vaishnavas and honoring them in all respects. One can worship, so again, through steady meditation. Lord is worshipped within the inner space of the heart of the living soul, the individual soul. So he is residing in our heart as Paramatma, so we can meditate on his name, form, activities, pastimes. And that's a very simple process, especially with Mahamantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. So Lord, it is said when we chant Mahamantra attentively, calling out for the Lordship to please engage us in his service. Shri Radha Krishna, please engage me in your service. At that time, Lord is dancing on our tongue, and this transcendental sound vibration just to our ears, to our heart, and with that light of knowledge, brightens everything. Our very consciousness is purified. And water itself is worshipped by offering water within water. And also other elements like flowers and tulsi leaves. One may worship Lord within the earth by the application of confidential seed mantras. One can worship Lord Shri Krishna within the individual living entity by offering food and other suitable substances. And one may worship Lord Shri Krishna in all living entities, seeing the super soul within each of them and thus maintaining equal vision. So here, Lord Krishna is revealing to Uddhav, and now this is a very nice segue to the next chapter where we will be covering in the next class. Lord Krishna is showing us who to worship and how to worship here. Please join us for Nasimha Devati. Hare Krishna. And that worship starts simply with the chanting of the holy name. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Oh, yes. So here, today, we actually learn how it is for our own purification, for our own benefit, that why we should surrender our hearts at the lotus feet of Shri Radha Krishna. so that we can get purified and experience eternal bliss, full knowledge, and reawaken our true self as eternal servant of Lord Shri Krishna and experience transcendental bliss and happiness for eternity. So that's the lesson we covered, all in all. And as how Srila Prabhupada, he was such an expert as a Vaishnava. So again, that's Daksha, the expert. And yet at the same time giving everyone equal opportunity to take to Krishna consciousness, he would come down to their level. So from Srila Prabhupada, it's a good time to meditate as how as a Vaishnava, he was such an exalted pure devotee of Lord Shri Krishna. By his example, he was showing, many of his disciples who were, when he came to America, they were actually drug addicts. So to one of them he said, "Oh, you deal with drugs? I also dealt with drugs." So this person became very, interesting. Wow. So, he thought that Srila Prabhupada is at his level. He was coming daily for the programs. Afterwards, talking to the other disciples of Srila Prabhupada, other devotees, he understood that actually Srila Prabhupada was talking about that he had Prayag pharmacy in Allahabad. So that's a different kind of drug. That's medical drugs, right? Not the kind of drugs they were talking about. Not the intoxicating chemicals. So Srila Prabhupada, he was an Uttama Adhikari. He would come down to the level of Madhyama Adhikari where preaching happens. And further, he would come down to the level to connect. And just like we heard in the story of the doctor, how he helped his daughter enter into a loving relationship with her mother-in-law. Similarly, Srila Prabhupada would make it so easy for all the, different kind of personalities he met in his life to take in this loving relationship with Lord Shri Krishna. And that is the purpose of Srimad Bhagavatam. What is the purpose of reading Srimad Bhagavatam? To attain the love of Godhead. So again, Srimad Bhagavatam is non-different from Krishna. Yet at the same time, by reading Srimad Bhagavatam, by studying Srimad Bhagavatam, by meditating on this transcendental knowledge and the transcendental ecstasies of Srila Prabhupada in Srimad Bhagavatam, we can attain the love of Godhead and easily we are able to surrender our hearts at the lotus feet of Shri Shri Radha Krishna. Hare Krishna, please join us for Nasimadev prayers. महाराज की जय, ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय, शीला प्रभुपाद की जय, अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय, निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे, हरि हरि बोल, हरे कृष्णा।
हरे कृष्णा।